Hello, everyone, and welcome to Full-on, your Fulham-centric football podcast. I'm your host, Ash Woolford. Joining me today is my co-host, Jack. How you doing, buddy?
I'm not too shabby. It's odd to hear you call me Jack, though. I think it's just because there's the
Wait,
one of us today.
it is because there is only the one of us. Obviously, this is our first ever live football preview, which has come about mainly through circumstance than anything else. But we were keen to get a show out today. Obviously, preparing for the SW6 Derby over the weekend, and we've also got a few things that sort of latest in news about Fulham that we want to talk about, have a quick discussion with. And obviously, if you are watching in and we are still on live, then feel free to comment on the video and come and share your views on some things. Jack, the first thing obviously we need to talk about in latest news is the overhanging doom that is the potential of clubs coming in for Marco Silva. We're all very, very clear on the show how much we know that he probably is our most important person at the club in terms of, forget the
Mm,
players, forget everything else. He's the one who sets the standard for us at the minute. It's slightly concerning, obviously, that he gets touted around. It's probably a good thing because it shows that he's doing great work for us. How concerned are you that we might well lose him over the summer, especially if Spurs come in or a bigger team in Europe come in, sort of looking for him?
it's highly dependent on how the end of our season goes, to be honest. My confidence is waived depending entirely on the remainder of the Premier League campaign. Spurs, I'm not overly concerned about. That right now is a step backwards and ultimately a step in the wrong direction for Marco. He's been in that wheelhouse before when he left Watford to join Everton. Feels like he's stepping up, but then finds out that everything behind closed doors at the club are completely screwed up, which is I think is the case at Spurs. Like they manage their club really well from a financial standpoint, and they're a really good business. They're not a very good football club, and I think that's something that Marco would really struggle with. The fact that he wouldn't get the backing to perform like he would need to. Everything is based on financial decisions. Even sacking a considered trophy winning manager a few days before a cup final to save a few bucks is sort of levels of financial scrutiny that Spurs will go to. So it doesn't feel like Marco's wheelhouse. However, that doesn't mean I'm not scared to lose him. I think Manchester United are a much more um, considerable threat if they choose to part ways with Amarin. I don't think that will happen personally. I think they'll give Amarin another full season and give him his own transfer window. But there is that threat that Manchester United be looking at someone who can push a team of not very good players further up the table, which I think is uh, a good uh, a good example of what he's doing at Fulham. On paper, we love a lot of our players now, but when they were signed or when we first played them, we would have said that they were not very good. Iwobi, Pereira, yeah, of the likes. It's one of those. Even Bassi, he came from a very bad reputation at Ajax. But yeah, Paul, do we think Marco probably needs a new contract? Yeah, I think it's probably a good idea. There's no harm in trying to keep your assets by keeping them happy and making sure that they're both financially and life supported in the way that they want to be. And it should hopefully ward off any new potential people coming in for him. I think the two biggest jobs that will come in for him will be the Spurs and United ones. I don't think there's any other major threats in the league outside of the league, maybe, unless it's a European giant, an Inter, a Bayern, a PSG, one of those comes in for him. I think we're in pretty safe territory.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you fully on that. To be honest with you, I think with Marco at the moment, although there is a little bit of there's a little bit of fence sitting. You know, the seesaws can go either way when you look at it because you know he is the sort of manager who in the past has obviously taken the opportunity to move upwards in moves, but we all know he's been burnt by doing that. You know, he's left really good jobs to go to so-called bigger clubs that haven't lasted longer than sort of 6 months to a year because the expectations at those clubs are so high, and maybe he doesn't perform so well under that sort of situation. I think the fit between Marco and Fulham is perfect at the moment in the sense of, yes, he probably would like a little bit more backing financially in the markets in certain places, but the job he's doing in terms of revitalizing other players. You look at the job he's done with Jimenez. You look at the job he's done with Bassi, as you say. Players that have come in probably after losing a bit of reputation. We look at Bassi especially. When he left Rangers, he was highly, sort of being a really, really good prospecting defender. Went to Ajax, had a bit of a bad time of things. And then, probably came into Fulham at the right time for him, and he's turned into a brilliant left-sided centre back. We love having him there. He is one of those players that I for one am sort of famously known for loving. It is what it is. Marco's done a great job. My only problem is if we fail to get to Europe this year, does he maybe sit there and go, "Oh, I've probably done as much as I can," or would it be more of for him to sit there and go, "Actually, we're so close, we can probably push on." It is one of those things that it's so unknown. I think in terms of Paul asking about does he need a new contract, possibly he does probably potentially need a new contract. But for me, the only reason why Fulham should be looking to give Marco a new contract would actually be to make sure that his buyout will be higher than it currently is to try and ward more people off.
It's only 8 million at the minute, right?
Yeah. I think it's 12 million for a for an English team and 8 million for a European team or something like that. But
Okay.
I would only make it bigger. I would only do that to make it bigger. But if I was Marco, Marco's not going to sign a new contract at Fulham unless he's given reassurances that we're going to spend money in certain positions. And if we get into Europe, if we somehow manage to stay in the fight for Europe, which we'll come and talk about in a little bit, he'll want guarantees in terms of financial backing and players that he's going to get,
Yeah.
for that to happen. So, for Marco to stay, that'll be it. In terms of, clubs coming in, Spurs coming for him, I don't necessarily think the project of Spurs is ideal for Marco Silva. I don't think Spurs fans are that thrilled by the idea of Marco Silva, from looking on social media. And I understand it because it's probably not the right fit for them. And the way that they perceive themselves to be as a football club. Spurs are famous for seeing themselves as like 7 or 8 rungs above what they actually are. Um, and there's a reason why even the greatest managers have gone there and failed to do jobs, and it's because of the expectation from the fans, the hamstringing that gets done from the board above them. And I don't think Marco Silva sort of thrive in that sort of situation. So, we have to look at it with Marco and go, that is what that is. Ultimately, if Fulham get Europe, Fulham don't get Europe. The most important person to keep at the club at the moment is Marco Silva, because the job he's done with certain players is phenomenal, and we know that he'll keep doing that as long as we keep him happy. And it's what he needs to keep him happy is probably ultimately the bigger question. AJ, looking at the squad at the moment, there's been questions around certain players. Obviously, we know we have 6 or 7 players at the end of the season that are coming out of contracts. There's a few players that we know the club had started talks with about signing new contracts, but hadn't necessarily done so. I think personally, one of the biggest ones to look at is actually Rodrigo Muniz. We
Yeah.
know that he is still quite young. He's still sort of quite malleable as a striker and trying to learn his game. We know that most strikers in his sort of form don't really hit their heights until their peaks until they're like 25, 26 years old. So we've got, a couple of years of
Yeah.
trying to push to get him bigger. But he is criminally underpaid for the role that he does at the club, if we're being honest.
Mhm.
And because of that, we know other Premier League clubs are now circling, and the idea of being able to entice him over just by offering him some decent money. He is one of those players that's really important we give a new contract to. The question is, what do we feel like his value might be in terms of, how much money should we be offering a player like him? And there's a lot of upside with Muniz. Let's not forget that. But what would be your inkling? What would be your feeling in terms of offering him a contract, promises that we offer him? Because obviously he's probably going to want still some breathing space and to learn.
Yeah, I mean, criminally underpaid is a bit of an understatement. He's currently paid less than Stephen Bender and Jorge Cunha, which is quite remarkable, and less than Carlos Vinicius and Ryan Sessegnon as well. Ryan obviously is very beloved by us, but let's be real, when we signed him as a free transfer, it could have gone either way. And it's something that we would have considered when negotiating his salary. So Rodrigo Muniz, with the way he's been performing in the Premier League over the last two campaigns, is definitely deserving of that pay rise. I think getting him in the sort of Harry Wilson, Tom Cairney, Calvin Bassey ballpark of salaries would make sense, and it gives him some room to grow. Uh, Raul Jimenez is one of our highest earners, but equally he's one of the people out of contract coming up, and with the likelihood that as we carry on, if Jimenez is to extend his contract, it will be at a pay cut, and that pay cut will probably go into Munez's pocket in sort of a passing of the baton in terms of who's the main striker at the club. And I think that's where we're getting to, that Rodrigo Muniz will likely become our go-to number 9, with Jimenez being the backup if he chooses to retain his position at the club. His contract's definitely deserved and it needs to be negotiated. But as you mentioned, we've got a lot of expiring contracts coming up. I think the big ones are that Raul Jimenez and the other backup striker that's only played a handful of games at max in Carlos Vinicius. Those are two, I would say, big concerns to lose, but they're only big concerns if we've got no intention of going into the market looking for a striker, or in case two strikers. I think we'd want to tie down one of them. The more likely one would be Jimenez, because he's a much better player realistically. But if we lose those, we will be looking at a new striking option. But are we going to go into the market looking for a number 1 striker, or are we going to go into the market looking for a backup striker? We're in a really difficult position now in terms of our forwards, in that we've given the two that we've got enough time to breathe and grow into the game. We're now in a position of, do we go and sign a Mitrovic replacement like we needed to do last summer or the summer before? Or do we actually deal with what we've got now and improve the players around them, get some goal scoring wingers in, actually give the some creative midfielders that can create more opportunities for Muniz and or Jimenez? It's a tough one. Paul's mentioned Kenny Tete's contract is another significant one to consider. With his injury record, it's a really, really tough one. He's coming on to 30. He's been injured 2 seasons in a row for a considerable amount of time. I don't see us extending any more than maybe 24 months at most, which might not be what he's looking for, coming on to the wrong side of 30. It's going to be one of those, yeah, does he want a new contract with us for convenience, or does he want to go back to playing in Holland, the Netherlands, whichever, and being more comfortable on a 5-year contract, knowing that he can play for Feyenoord or something of those likes for the rest of his career? It's a tough one for him. And then the others are obviously Reece Nelson, who's a loan, Tom Cairney, who's signed a new deal, and Willian, who, if we renew, I would be quite surprised. He's a bit of a stopgap at this stage. We need new young-blooded wingers, and I think that's going to be key in the window coming.
The thing is, we have to look at these players with contracts that are running out and what they are. You know, we know that obviously. I'm using transfer market obviously as the base to look at the players with contracts expiring that we need to look at. But we know that the club had apparently started sitting down with Tom Cairney to look at a contract. You know what that will entail, we don't know. Realistically, it's probably going to be more of a winding down contract, looking at just seeing his time out, and then that'll be it. Probably looking to maybe start taking up some coaching roles within the club, and then going from there. You know, Tom Cairney is in that stage of his career now where he's probably not that desirable for any team to come in and buy him or to sign him up, even as a free, because, you know, as we discussed lately, you know, we love him at Fulham. We all love him, but, you know, you're not going to get 30 games out of Tom Cairney a season. You're not going to get many full 90 minutes out of Tom Cairney anymore, because, you know, as we've seen a few times, the legs and the head, the legs are probably starting to go from where the head is. Doesn't mean he's not valuable to us, because he is valuable to us. You know, coming on those 10-15 minute cameos he gets at Fulham at the moment have been vital in some games in order to keep head and to keep, you know, control of certain games. So, you know, there's that one. Yeah, I agree with you with Willian. You know, signing 36-year-old Willian just to get his full legal name in was obviously, it came as a bit of a shock to some people in January. It's a bit frustrating for an awful lot of us that he was the only player that we signed in January, but it's a move that made sense for everybody when you look at it and what he is. Again, maybe he gets another contract with Fulham, but if he does, would that maybe be as a case of Tom Cairney as you know, looking to move on from playing days and going into coaching? Who knows? The way that Willian works and, you know, his love for football, I wouldn't be surprised to see him, you know, going down a league and, you know, getting time, just playing as long as he physically can. So who knows? You know,
I
there's
don't
no.
think it would be in England's mind. I don't think he
No,
has
no,
the
no.
physicality for the Championship.
Yeah, when I say go down league, I just meant a step of quality, not necessarily like down to the Championship. But, you know, because I imagine he's going to be one of those players that will keep playing until until his legs physically don't work anymore. So, like, he just gives that vibe as a sort of player. And to be fair to him, the type of player he is, because he's all football brain. He is all football brain. He's never been about his pace and his power. I can see that happening. You know, there are certain players you look at. Carlos Vinicius, realistically, why the club have an option for a year on him. The only reason why I imagine Fulham take up that option is because they want to sell him and someone's actually coming in for him. Other than that, he's probably dead space in the squad. You know, we've not seen him at all this season. And I think that the reason for that is because he's just not seen as being good enough. And he was only really kept around because we sold Jay Stansfield. You know, you look at Adama Traore. I think the club still have an option for another year on Adama Traore. Again, wouldn't be surprised if the club take it,
I thought we
but it
extended
would.
that last year.
But I'm not too sure we still have another. But you know,
Maybe.
you look at it. Who knows? You know, Kenny Tete. I'm in the realms of agreeing with you. I love Kenny Tete. I'd love him to stay, but we have a real issue on both of our wing back positions. You know, we know Anthony Robinson's going to be looked into this summer. There's probably going to be a couple of clubs coming in for him. And both of our right backs, as good as Timmy Castagne has been, you know, he's consistently 7 out of 10 most weeks, right? But we probably want someone slightly better. We probably want someone slightly better than that in that position. Ideally, we would have had Kenny Tete, but Kenny Tete's injury record's now to the point where you can't rely on him to be available for 15 games in a row, which is slightly slightly concerning. So it wouldn't be I wouldn't be too surprised if Fulham look to maybe replace in that position as well over the summer.
Yeah.
As much as we all love Kenny Tete and we'd all love him to stay, realistically, if you have Kenny Tete in your team, you need another right back because he isn't going to give you a full season. And that is a shame because Kenny Tete gives you 9 out of 10 most weeks and is an absolutely superb right back. It's just we're not in a position, especially with the way that Michael likes to have squads, of having that many players in
Yeah.
each position that you can do things. So we have to be careful. Raul Jimenez is probably the big one for me, because Raul Jimenez has proven that he's starting to find form again that we haven't seen from him in a couple of years. And weirdly, because of that head injury and the time he had out, he's probably still got a couple more years left in playing. So I wouldn't be too surprised if we try to do some of him to extend his contract by a year or so. But then I also wouldn't be surprised if, say, someone from the MLS came in for him, or something like that, because I could see him wanting to wind his career down a little bit where he's still going to get appreciated. And if he went and played in the MLS, with the amount of Mexican football fans there are in the US, he will get lauded around like there's no tomorrow. And he probably deserves that, to be fair. He's had a career that deserves that. And, it's one of those players that I appreciate the time we've had with him at Fulham. And it is what it is. And it still feels weird for me to call someone that old, and when I'm 2 years older than him, but how that is. It is what it is with me.
Showing your cards there, Ash.
Yeah. Like I just feel like it's now. Reece Nelson's an interesting one. Obviously, we know he's only on loan. He's going back to Arsenal. I know a few people have asked us in the last couple of weeks. We've had a few people interact and ask about, would we try sign Reece Nelson in the summer? I'd love to sign Reece Nelson in the summer. But for me, it's going to be very much dependent on value. Anything above sort of 15 to 16 million pound for me is probably too much for Reece Nelson. And
especially after the injury
solely because of his injury record. He's a quality player, and the bit of football we have seen him play for Fulham this year has been great. But all of the input he's had in game wise for us has been superb. My problem is that he is just constantly injured, and we know ESR's had a similar issue before he came in at Fulham. He was just constantly injured. I don't know what it is about Arsenal. I don't know what it is about the players that they have, especially youth level, but they are very, very injury prone at certain things. The most frustrating thing with Reece Nelson is obviously the way he got his injury. Pulling muscles when you're just running down the wing and you're meant to have been subbed off already, is slightly frustrating. But that is what it is. He's already gone back to Arsenal to start getting treatment. So is that them assessing? Is that them assessing whether or not they are going to be up for selling him during the summer? I don't know. We will see. Those particular contracts coming to an end and loans ending is quite interesting for Fulham, because it leaves us with what is already a small squad getting extremely smaller and us losing players in very key positions. So, we will talk about it loads over the summer, and it's probably going to be endless content for us as a show over the summer. But, the squad size, especially if we get into Europe, is so small that we're looking at probably an overhaul over this summer. And that's an overhaul without actually selling any players. That's just people with contracts coming to an end, which is slightly concerning. It's slightly concerning, when you think about it. Does the squad size worry you at all, AJ, especially with like the summer coming up?
Yeah, before I get into that, just to comment on the Reece Nelson thing. He's definitely an interesting player, but there are a lot of things that would need to move into place to be a permanent signing. The fee needs to be right, injury record needs to be considered, and the fact that he's on 100k a week needs to be looked at. It's something that as a loan player you can swallow for 12 months, but not something with his injury record that we could have on a permanent basis. It's definitely something to worry about. But yeah, back to your question. Squad size, I think there's a few gaps to fill, mostly around filling with quality. This is assuming we don't lose anyone, obviously. Like if we were to sign everyone we've got onto new contracts, we don't lose anyone in the summer, which isn't likely. The likelihood is some will go, some will stay, and some will be replaced. That's just what football is. But if we would take the squad as a whole right now, what it is, and say we're not going to lose anyone, where do we need to fill in gaps? We need a backup left back. We need a backup right back. We need, and we need some very offensive wingers, very attacking, direct, fast. Because fuck knows the last time we had any wingers with a bit of pace about them. You could argue Reece Nelson, but how quickly he got onto the injury bench is not necessarily an indication of pace. Kidding. I know he's not that slow. But yeah, it like realistically, you could argue Adama Traore has a bit of pace, but he's a bit of a steam train. Once he gets going, he's not going to exactly shift his pace and change direction really quickly. It's once he gets going, he's gone. So we need a really offensive, fast player that's got good acceleration about them. The last few players we've had of that ilk have all been fullbacks. Anthony Robinson, Ryan Fredericks, etc. Exceptionally fast players that are very good at stop starting, but just not forward players. It's just unfortunate that we haven't had that luxury. And I think it's really important when you get into the top end of football that you do have that direct, fast attacking pace. I can't think of a top side that has ever succeeded without it. With that in mind, we also need some creative players, someone that can break down a defence, because that's where we have fallen short on every hurdle this season. A couple of years ago, we were the opposite. We were doing really well when we didn't have possession. No, it was the same thing. What am I on about? I'm just remembering back to the stat from, what was it, last year or the year before? It was like we had played all of our games and only 2 games where we had over 55% possession, we had actually won the match. And both of those games were like someone who was relegated, and the other one was a cup game against Ipswich, I think. So yeah, it's one of those. We struggle when we have more of the ball. We're very good at retaining it, but we're not very good at creating opportunities through it. And we don't have the assets. We don't have forwards that create their own goal scoring opportunities. And we don't have creative midfielders who create opportunities for forwards. So us playing against a low block is just basically us writing off the game, unfortunately. But
Yeah, it's one
I
of those
hope that
frustrating
answers your
things, isn't it?
question. I know I rambled a little bit.
No, 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 no. It's absolutely fine. That we have to deal with certain things. You look at the way that the football is working, especially with Fulham at the moment, and you know, ideally we have a few players running out of steam. We have a few players that are probably worth a lot of money to us that may well have some transfer dealings with during the summer. The funny thing is, with when you look at that, is that weirdly losing some of those players that are linked to leave might not be a bad thing for Fulham. We know that Andreas Pereira's got his agent working overtime trying to get him a move away, because
Yep.
that he's linked to every top club every 6 weeks, every single time we play a big team. Suddenly there's rumors in the press about what was it, Atleti being interested in this week, which I can absolutely guarantee you there is one thing I would love to watch more in football than Andreas Pereira trying to play Simeone football, because it just would not happen. It is what it is. I think we have to be realistic, and we have to look at Robinson is going to be of interest to a lot of clubs this summer. And that may well be us looking to go. Is now, if we're ever going to cash in on him, is it this summer that we maybe look to do that? I don't necessarily want to lose him because I think he's a great left back. I know people might be shocked by hearing me say that if they see me moaning about his crossing, but I think he is one of those players that he has grown so much over the last couple of years as a player that is probably the most valuable he's ever been to Fulham if we were to sell him this summer. The problem is trying to find a replacement for him that is going to be of his quality and not cost the world, which is unfortunately probably unlikely to happen. Although there are a few players that that are linked that we see that. Paul's asked about players linked to come in. What I find interesting this week is that an awful lot of our transfer links are players that have already played for Fulham. We've been linked with potentially getting João Palhinha back if he looks to leave Bayern Munich this summer. One that I could see happening, but I'm also exceptionally happy with Lukic and Sander Berg playing in that midfield at the moment. It feels strange to say this after watching João Palhinha get yellow carded what it felt like every week. To say that we probably found a player who's better at getting yellow carded than him in Lukic, but I still love that pair. If he came in, I imagine if we get Europe, that would probably work because we could probably manage the playing load of all three of them. The other player that obviously we've been linked to this week was Frank Sambo and Gisa. I don't know what Fulham are doing at the moment in terms of trying to bring players that have already played for the club back in. I am 100% convinced that the management at Fulham have looked at that Scott Parker team that got relegated and gone, we just want to prove just how much of a football terrorist that man is. And we're going to bring them all back in and we're going to prove that it wasn't the squad that was the problem. It was the manager. It is what it is there when you look at it. Other players we've been linked to, I did read that we potentially might be interested in signing Leif Davis from Ipswich, a move that I was screaming for. I was screaming for at the beginning of the season because I know how good of a player he is. He's had a bit of a mediocre season at Ipswich. He's been a bit up and down, but he's still exceptionally young. And I reckon that Marco Silva and his team could work absolute wonders with a player like him. He's a player with a lot of upshot. The only problem is Ipswich aren't going to let him go for cheap. And, that may well be the sticking point there with him. Other players that we've been linked to, there aren't really any strong particular rumours. The thing is with Fulham at the moment is none of us really know what we are looking at in terms of the summer yet. We don't know if we're looking at trying to build a squad that's going to play in Europe. We don't know, if we're looking at a squad that hasn't quite made Europe and just looking to improve to try push on next year. It'll be interesting to see how that lies. Right, Jack, we've been doing it. We're doing this for half an hour. We're not actually spoke about what we're actually here to speak about. So, let's do the Chelsea
good topic
preview.
Avoidance. Well done, Ash.
Yeah. Big game coming up on Sunday. Fulham looking to do the league double over Chelsea, I believe, for the first time ever, which is amazing to think about it. This is a massive game for us Fulham fans, especially. Most of us who are from Fulham or been Fulham fans forever have, really strong links with both clubs in a way. I don't know about you, Jack, but my family has many Chelsea fans in it.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So it is one of those rivalries for us that is really, really important. And we also know that, we see it way more of a rivalry than Chelsea do. That is what that is.
Nowadays, yeah.
However, I don't really care about what Chelsea fans think. It'd be massive to get the league double over them, especially considering that they've spent £2 billion in the last year and a half. So, it would be lovely to think that we could, well, in the last 2.5 years, not a year and a half, it would be nice to think that we could maybe do that, especially considering that, we're sat here with Marco Silva's, not budget squad because we still spend a lot of money, but, a squad that's
Not a
been
few
built
billion though,
on
is it?
Rejuvenise, nowhere near, nowhere near. Looking at the game on Sunday and looking back to Monday night, sort of disappointing result of Bournemouth, what changes would you make to the squad going into the game?
I don't think any changes are necessary. I just think it was. I just think it was unfortunate in the way that we played um, against Bournemouth, and the fact that they chose not to play their style of football and chose to sit back and let us attack them. Something that Chelsea most necessarily will absolutely not do at home, especially under Maresca. So I think that we're in a good stead to stick with the same lineup and go, right, the game plan was right. What do we do in regards to Chelsea? And it's exactly what we did against Liverpool. We beat them at their own game, and we actually have the opportunity to break quickly, break behind lines, get behind their defence, something that we couldn't do against Bournemouth. Purely because of the way they chose to set up against us. And I think them scoring inside of 60 seconds helped them make that decision against us, in that they now just need to sit back and let us try and break them down, which is where we really struggled. I think if that game had gone 30, 40 minutes without a goal, we might have seen more of Bournemouth playing their brand of football and it being a much more open game towards the second half. But uh, that's that's just something I guess we'll never know. Um, I don't think the lineup was wrong. I just think that we struggle way too hard because we haven't got any creative sparks to break down a team that are going to shut up shop against us. Chelsea won't do that, and they will not do that at home. It is at Stamford Bridge, right? If I'm not mistaken, or
It's a
is it?
Craven
No,
Cottage.
it's a Craven
No,
Cottage.
so
Okay, so they
yeah,
they might sit back a little bit at the cottage then. No, of course we won at Stamford Bridge, didn't we? Yes,
yep.
of course. Uh, they might sit back a little bit, but still, it's not the Maresca style of football, so it's a bit of a tricky one. Um, yeah, I don't see them sitting back as much as we would expect. Wilson is an interesting one. I don't think he gets back in the starting lineup. I think he definitely gets back in the squad, and we will likely see him probably make a cameo towards the end of the game. If you're a betting person, somewhere around the 60 or 70-minute mark, as Marco likes to do. And it'll be a like for like swap for whoever is probably playing at right wing. It would hazard my guess. So Sessegnon to Wilson on in the 65th minute. Place your bets now. Um, yeah, Wilson has a big part to play, and he's one of the few players that can break down a defence for two reasons. One, he's very good at breaking behind a line. He's not exceptionally quick, but he's very good at playing off the last man and playing that offside trap really, really well. And he's one of the few players that knows how to break an offside trap. So credit to him in that regard. But also, he's extremely creative. He's got an eye for a reverse pass. He's very clever with his passing. He's got good diagonal passing as well, as we've seen. The 2 or 3 games of his career that I've seen him play in the number 10, he was beyond outstanding. And I'd love to see more of it, but I just don't think it will come. I think because of his physicality and the fact that he is quite small, he's less likely to be put into that midfield role when we realistically don't play a 4-2-3-1. We play a 4-3-3 with a 10 that in possession goes into the 10 role and out of possession drops into the 8. We can't do that with Wilson, because Wilson dropping into that 8, he will get bullied physically by natural number 8s and number 6s. So it's a real shame that we probably won't see him in that number 10 role again, at least in any league capacity. Which is a shame. I think there's ways around that, and I'd like to see more of Wilson in that role. You could have it so that Iwobi moved out wide, and then went out of possession. Iwobi dropped into the 8, and Wilson went out wide. Like, there are ways of doing it, but that's for Marco to figure out and for him to do himself. In Marco, we trust.
Yeah,
But
this is
yeah,
interesting. I think when we look at this Chelsea squad that we're going to play on Sunday, we had a conversation about it a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about the fact that they played last night in the Conference League wasn't
yeah,
really going to matter because they basically have two squads effectively. But
yeah.
interesting, looking at the
Oh,
squad that lost last night to Lega Warsaw, they played an awful lot of what I would consider to be their first string players, the players that you would expect to see play in the Premier League, especially, you know, against us on Sunday. I know they've had a few players that are sort of in goal droughts and having issues scoring, which is always a concern when you're a Fulham fan because we all know what that genuinely means about Fulham and pushing on. But you know, they lost last night to Lega Warsaw at home, and they had
yeah,
Palmer, they had Sancho, they had James, they had Adebayo, they had Bashiri, they had Cucurella, they had Nkuku, they had Jackson
Jackson.
in that team. Like that's a strong team. So something's going wrong at Chelsea at the moment, right? What it is, don't care, right? I don't care what's going wrong at Chelsea. I just hope that you know it stays going wrong for us on Sunday. It is one of those weird things here where you know they're a bit of a wounded lion that they're not the Chelsea that probably we're used to playing, and which is even weirder considering the fact they've not had a good couple of years. But I think they're even in a worse state now than they were when we played them on Boxing Day, in the sense of there
Yeah,
seems to be a lot of division at Chelsea at the moment. You know, naturally I have a lot of Chelsea mates, so I have this discussion quite regularly with them. There's a lot of concerns about the way that the club's being run, and there's an awful lot of concern about the way that Maresca plays and whether or not it's right for the squad that they have, considering the amount of money that they've spent on that squad. Again, I don't care, right? I don't care that Chelsea are in a bad shape and a bad way. We know that when it comes to derbies, as much as Chelsea fans like to pretend this isn't a derby, it is. They'll pick themselves up for Sunday, and we're gonna have to be at our best to get any result out of the game. They're probably going to want to avenge what they saw as a bit of an embarrassing loss on Boxing Day to
yeah,
us. Their fans particularly weren't happy about losing against Fulham, and I don't blame them for that. But we have to look at it from our point of view and go, what do we need to do in order to win on Sunday? The mindset for me needs to change a little bit from what we saw on Monday night. We're at home, so naturally we're probably going to have the impetus of playing football. Even though on Monday we had that too, because Bournemouth completely changed the way they played, and Bournemouth did that thing that we all know that it's really easy to beat Fulham by letting us play football, low block, make us beat you because we run out of ideas as soon as we hit the edge of the box, right? Something's going to have to change on Sunday in order for us to get a result. The good news is I don't think Chelsea going forward have the ability to not sit to not play their style of football trying to go forward
yeah,
because they've got too many big names in that squad that will be happy to sit back and try to defend, especially away at Fulham.
yep,
Looking at that for us, right? We know how important this game is for us. We know how much we want to win it. Doing the league double over Chelsea for the first time ever would be absolutely immense. What do we need to do in order to make sure that the mindset's correct and actually beat them? Do we need to do what we did against Liverpool and just try to play the counter punch that worked? Or do we need to do what we did against Tottenham, where we tried to take the ball by the horns and actually play football? And it took ages, but it did eventually start working. Obviously, we scored the late goal with Brian Session on and stuff to sort of win. But what are you expecting mentality wise from us going into the game?
it'll be a combination of the two. We will go out to seek to control the game because we're at home, That's natural instinct by us. But Chelsea are a team that, because of the way they're managed and the type of players they have, won't want to do that. So it'll become a battle in the midfield, which then gives us the opportunity when they are in control of the game. Because what happens with these battles of possession is you'll have teams under different spells. 15 minutes of possession for football, 20 minutes of possession for Chelsea, 15 minutes for Fulham, etc. It will go in that sort of pattern of control. We'll have the opportunity in the patterns of control where we're not in control of the game, that we'll be able to counter quickly, effectively, and get at them from in behind their defence. So we'll have the luxury of playing both styles of football. Where we need to be very cautious not to come undone is not when we have control of the tempo and they have the opportunity to counter, but the opposite. When they have control of the tempo, they're going to be much better at creating opportunities against a low block than we are. And that's just a given. Cole Palmer will skin two players and put in a pass to Nicholas Jackson that will put him 1-on-1, despite the fact that we'll have four defenders in front of them. It's just that's they are capable of breaking down a defence like that. That's where we'll need to be more careful because we're not a typical low block side. So when we are caught trying to defend our box, we need to be less error prone and be more focused. We can't have what happened in the 60 seconds at Bournemouth. Granted, that was a counter attack, not a creative breakdown of a defence. But alas, the point stands. It was a lapse of focus and judgment. It was Castagna giving the ball away needlessly in the midfield, allowing the counter. It was Robinson doing everything right until he falls on his arse and then leaves a player 1-on-1 with Anderson. Anderson turning his back to a defender who's to a forward who's perfectly capable on his left foot. Like, these things are amateurish at best, and it's something that we can't do against Chelsea, who, man for man, are probably, even with their goal drought, stronger offensively than Bournemouth, which is what we have to worry about.
Yeah, no, it is tragically true. When you look at that, we are our own worst enemies half the time, and we
Just
know
half.
going into a game like this, going into a game like this, going into a game like this, we're going to have to be positive. We're going to have to be strong. We're going to have to make sure that we don't make those defensive mistakes. It's going to be an exceptionally big game for Calvin Bassey and Anderson in terms of trying to keep Cole Palmer quiet, as well as just doing the rest of their jobs exceptionally well. It's going to be a difficult game. It always is against Chelsea, especially home or away, because for some unknown reason, like Liverpool, they are one of those teams that it doesn't matter how well we play against them. They've always got like some sort of worldy goal or some,
Mm-hmm.
ball bounces off of six players, goes in off someone's arse type of goal against us. It always happens, so it's going to be a big, big game. But mentally, physically, I think we're there as a football team. We can beat this Chelsea team. I'm going into this game not confident that we're going to beat Chelsea because I never am, but you know, I'm comfortable. Weirdly, I feel like we'll be up for the fight, and I think that enough of the Fulham players know how important this game is that
Yeah.
we'll pick it up. But we'll see that. Look, AJ,
Question
we're
for
going to finish
you.
this. Yeah, go on, mate. Go on.
Very quick question for you just before we get on to how we normally finish. Do
Yeah.
you think there'll be some question in Marco's mind that we beat this Chelsea side previously with a back three/back five and that we might reconsider it going again into this Chelsea fixture?
I think the back five when we played them on Boxing Day was out of necessity, not necessarily out of style.
Yeah.
I also think that playing Chelsea at Stamford Bridge and playing Chelsea at Craven Cottage are two different things.
Yep.
We all know that Chelsea at Stamford Bridge, if you can keep them quiet for half an hour, their fans start getting on their back, and then they become really tentative, and they become, in a way, they become easier to play if you can keep them quiet for for that long. We found that when we played them on Boxing Day, we were doing really, really well, and then they scored, and then there was that slightly uphill battle, but we managed to get over it. Playing them away from home, I'm not saying their away fans are better than their home fans, but their away fans are better than their home fans. They don't get on their back if they haven't made they don't get on their back immediately if they're not 3-0 up after 10 minutes. They know that that's not to be expected when they're playing away from home. So, it's a little bit of a different mindset from them there. However, I think they this season have struggled away from home in certain games. And as much as Craven Cottage hasn't been the strongest place for us to play this season, we've been better away from home, I feel like, in certain games. And we need to take advantage of that. And the fans need to be on that on Sunday to give that. Whether we play 4 at the back or we play 5 at the back, I imagine we're just going to play our normal game on Sunday. I don't imagine us changing formation for Chelsea at home, because Marco's going to want to play our style of game. But if we did go into the game 5 at the back, I wouldn't be massively shocked. Marco likes to do this in games every now and then, where he throws a bit of a curveball, because he knows that bigger clubs sometimes aren't necessarily as prepared for it, because they don't expect teams like Fulham to change for a positive reason other than a negative reason. So that might, who knows what will happen there, but
yeah,
I doubt we will, but I won't be surprised if we do. It is one of those things. Okay, so let's finish this how we always finish this, right? Player to watch of both teams, and then the dreaded scoreline prediction. But obviously it's just me and you, so we can talk about it. You can break it down, AJ. Chelsea got a lot of really good quality players. As out of form as some of them are, but who do you think are the real players to watch for both teams going into the game on Sunday?
I'm going basic. It's gonna be Cole Palmer. He's on a goal scoring drought, which means Santa Fulham are here to help, buddy. Don't worry. You'll score against us. Not to worry. Nice one, Cole. Enjoy your goal. As for the rest of the squads, I think if we start Sessegnon, that battle between Sessegnon and Cucurella could be very, very interesting. Cucurella is known to have a defensive error in him from time to time. Very offensive fullback, somewhat similar to Robinson in some elements. A much more hateable person, but as a football player, he's very similar in a lot of aspects to Robinson. So him being pinned by an equally aggressive Sessegnon could be interesting. Additionally, we could see us drop Sessegnon and play a Wobie on that right-hand side to double up the defensive support for Castagna, so that he doesn't have to worry about Cucurella as much. It depends what mindset we go into the game with, whether or not we want to pin them back or we want to protect our assets in defence. Players to watch for Fulham: Castagna, if he's still playing over Kenny Tete, which I imagine he will be, is on how many games in a row now that he's played consecutively and done pretty much the full 90 in every single one of them.
20 something, 24, 25, something like that.
Yeah,
way too many. Way too many, to be fair.
I know 2 games ago Kenny Tete did come on for a 5-10 minute spell or whatever it was, but that's not considerate of the rest that Castagna really needs, in my opinion. So if Kenny Tete comes back in, he'll be a player to watch. He struggled last time he came back from injury. His first full 90 was an absolute disaster, and saw players for one single game where he had a bad spell because of his return from injury. He had players on his back like I've never seen Fulham fans do before. That's how bad that performance was from him last time he came back from injury. So that's something to consider if he starts. And Ryan Sessegnon would be my Fulham boy to watch. I don't think he's done enough to get dropped. I think he was supposed to stay on the pitch in the last game. He's clearly performing to a way that Marco appreciates. And let's be real, Ryan Sessegnon scoring at Craven Cottage against Chelsea. Mwah! Things dreams are made of. Did you want my score prediction now, or did you want to give your players?
We'll do that. Let me break some players down, then we'll do them together. You know,
Cool.
let's look at this. Let's look at this Chelsea team, right? Let's be honest, right? Who knows what Chelsea team we're going to play on Sunday? They have 6 players in pretty much every single position they could possibly play, right? Let's not forget the fact that they have 8 goalkeepers in that squad, right? They are a huge squad. There are 7 goalkeepers and Marcus Bettinelli driving that minibus every single week, right? At Chelsea. They are a huge, huge squad. So it is really hard to cut down. And the problem is with that is not only is it a huge squad, it is a very, very talented squad. As much as it is underperforming, you know, Maresca could probably look at taking a book out of like a page out of Marco Silva's book and filling that squad out a bit if Chelsea are going to do better if you're looking at it. But you know, Cole Palmer's the easy player to pick out from Chelsea squad. You know, he is the player that has over the last year and a half properly come out shining for them. You know, other players to look out for, I would say James, but you know, he'll probably break a leg, you know, getting off the bus or something because he's that type of player.
Start, to be honest.
Like you look at Cucurella's, he's a good player. I hate him, but he's a good player. If he doesn't play, then Gusto will play, and he's also a good player. You know, it is what it is. Adebayo playing on Sunday. He got a lot of stick by Fulham fans at Stamford Bridge. He'll probably get a lot of stick by Fulham fans at Craven Cottage on Sunday. He is one of those players that we know from his time at Fulham. He can be exceptionally good, but he can also be exceptionally Sunday league. So you know, we need to hope that we see probably some of the latter of him. Sancho is another player. Who knows? Pedro Neto again might play instead of Sancho. He got a couple of minutes last night. Pedro Neto is owed a proper clap in the face after pretending he was injured at Stamford Bridge. You know, it is one of those things. I don't really want to talk about Chelsea players too much. Really, I don't really care. I don't. They're £2 billion. They're £2 billion squads is bloated and disgusting and everything that is wrong with modern day football. Because you know it's full of big names on big money and long contracts that probably aren't worth remotely half of what they are. You look at the Fulham squad, and I look at this game and I go, "There's some big opportunities for players to step up in this game." You know, these are probably one of the games where Calvin Bassey would come in and look really, really good. You know, he needs to have a strong game. Anderson needs to have a strong game, as we said. I imagine Cess will play on Sunday on that right wing, and it'll be a big game for him. It'll be if he score, you chef kissed it. If he could score on Sunday, I was crying when he scored against Tottenham. If he scores against Chelsea, I'm gonna be like an emotional wreck when you think about it. Leno might have to be really on it in this game too, because Chelsea aren't afraid to shoot. That's one of their biggest problems is the fact that they love a shot from distance. And we know that Leno likes to get beat from distance. So it's one of those things that you know it could be there. Anthony Robinson, I think, has got a little bit of making up to do from the quality of game we saw from him on Monday night. He dropped an absolute stinker, but I'm not to the point where I'm going to berate him for that because he's outshone himself in 10 times as many games this season and he's had bad games. Yeah. So, you know, he could be there to watch too. But for me, the one player to watch in that Fulham squad on Sunday is going to be Sasha Lukic, because if we're going to win this game, we need to make sure that our midfield is strong. So that Sasha Lukic, Sander Berg pivot in midfield is going to have to be on it. Sasha Lukic needs to be on it because he needs to get through the game without getting yellow carded. He needs to get through that game and do it that way. So he's going to be my player to watch.
He's not up for another suspension already, is he?
He's not far from it. He's not
I
far, and
agree.
the next suspension will be a 3-game suspension for 15 yellow cards. So he
Yeah.
really, really does need to be on his game for a couple of weeks to make sure that he isn't getting banned before the end of the season. So we'll see how that goes. Let's give our match predictions before we sort of say our goodbyes. AJ, what's your scoreline prediction for Sunday?
Mm. Head or heart?
Go ahead, because
2
heart will kill us.
2-0 Chelsea
Okay,
is what my head
fair
is
enough.
saying. I think we're going to go into this with false confidence. I think we're going to go into it. We beat them at home. We're playing against a team in poor form. We're going into from a fan's perspective, we're going into a game where we're on a run of win loss win loss win loss win loss, and the last game was a loss, which automatically means that this game must be a win. It's all set up for really bad false confidence and to have us bitten in the arse. Um, Realistically, as much as that league form does say win loss win loss win loss, we lost back to back games to Crystal Palace and Arsenal in arguably two of the worst performing games of the season. The Liverpool game then showed what we're really made of, and then we bounced back from that Liverpool game in another ridiculously poor defeat. So I don't necessarily know that we've got the bottle with the pressure that we've got to get European football to take on Chelsea right now, who will look at this game as a much bigger thing than they ever normally do. For once, especially for the players, this is an actual derby to them. In a long, long time, there hasn't been as much reason to fend us off as they normally would do. Normally, it's the lion getting pissed off with the lice that's biting on his rear end. At the moment, this is lion encroaching another lion's territory, and they've really got to fend us off. So I'm concerned that we don't have the bottle to do that at the moment, based on our recent experience of these really important games. I think the most important one being last week or Monday, as it were, where we had the opportunity to put space between us and the teams beneath us chasing for these European spots, and we've completely thrown it away. And now it feels like, from the remaining games perspective, that we're going to need some assistance from the teams around us to lose games to secure these European spots. Where prior to Monday, it was entirely in our hands, and I don't feel comfortable with that, and I think it's more likely that we drop some points here. Um, my heart says otherwise. My heart says that we'll roll them over, but I have to be honest. As much as I don't want to be disappointing here, um, I don't think we'll go into this game as strong-willed as we think we will. I think there's going to be a lot of false confidence, and that'll bite us in the ass. Sorry,
Yeah,
sorry.
no. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Look, head and heart always say different things, especially with Fulham, right? Because we could be going into a game where we're playing, you know, we're playing against like Tooting Park FC, and I would still my head would still be telling me we could lose this game. It's one of those things, right? Um, I said I'm going into this game confident on Sunday. I also think that the way Marco Silva likes to destroy records, and he has done so far for Fulham, um, I can see us getting that league double over Chelsea for the first time ever this weekend. But because it's Fulham, we'll mess it up. So I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go 2-2,
Okay.
and I'll even go as far to say Chelsea will score a last-minute equaliser, and it'll be completely of our own making, of completely of our own fault. And we'll be sat here on Monday when we, as a team, sit down and do our review for it. Comes out on Tuesday, and we'll be sitting there going, "How did we mess that up?" Because that's just the way Fulham roll, and
Hmm.
that'll be it. And also because God forbid Fulham give us a positive episode to make for once, because we've not had a positive match review in a very long time, and it's been a little. Well, the Liverpool game obviously was positive, but that was more just dubious
Depends
because
who
we were
you
worried
ask.
about. Yeah, yeah, that's very true. Yeah, if you're an opposition fan watching, you're ecstatic at watching us sit there going, "What was that?" But
I meant, I
it
meant,
is
I
what it
meant
is.
more the I want more the Liverpool one being a positive reaction because you didn't have to do it in your underpants.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. So yeah, I'm going to go 2-2, but hopefully, I'm wrong. Hopefully, you're wrong, and we're sat here on Monday. We're ecstatic that we've done the league double for the first time ever. AJ, thanks very much for joining me for this live preview. It's the first time we've done one of these live, so thanks to everyone who has sort of jumped in and watched and seen a bit of it. Thanks to Paul, who obviously has interacted with the show quite a lot. Paul, it's appreciated,
3-1
mate.
to
Everybody
who,
else.
Paul? 3-1 to who?
I think he's gone 3-1 Fulham with the fact he's put 3 first, but we'll see.
Yeah,
We will see.
brave man.
Yeah, so thanks very much for joining that. We'll be back on Tuesday, hopefully with a full collection of us, with Mozza and Drew being back as well. And we'll see how that goes. Everyone who has come and followed the show the last couple of weeks, it's been great to see that. We finally hit 100 subscribers, which is great for us. I have promised that when we reach 500 subscribers, we will do a giveaway from our merch store. Moving on to our merch store, obviously the link is below. It's Fulham Ful-on podcast at myspotify.com. We've got loads of Fulham related gifts and t-shirts and stuff, including these lovely mugs that we use that we love to sort of have and use on the show.
We need a left-handed version, though.
We do need a left-handed version, which is kind of ironic because all 4 of us that were presenting the show are left-handed.
This, although it's a couple of seasons old now, this, as signed by the squad, will be up for grabs at 1,000 subscribers. So get on it.
1,000 subscribers. There you go. So keep pushing. If you haven't subscribed to the show, please do. Please also share along with your other Fulham mates. Try and get some more people over to us. It would be fantastic. Everyone going to the game on Sunday. Hope you all have a great Easter Sunday. Hope that the Fulham result is there. I hope the boys give us all a present that we deserve on this Easter Sunday. Everybody else, enjoy your weekends. We will see you next week for the show review. And other than that, there's not much more to say other than come on, you Whites.